My name's Suzanne Snyder, and I'm happy to be here from Oral History Summer School. Oral History Summer School is an oral history training program that now runs all year. It's based in Hudson, New York, and we travel to other sites as well, everywhere from Chicago to Kosovo. And I've had the deep pleasure over the last 10 years of supporting the growth of an audio archive. And that has happened through the participation of learners who come to Hudson or live in Hudson, learn about oral history, and conduct life histories with community residents. And I want to thank everyone who's participated in building this archive, which opened publicly a couple months ago. We'll be sharing information. Tracy's going to put the link to the archive in the chat so you can explore it on your own time, and you'll hear some excerpts from it tonight. I just want to explain in terms of the relationship between oral history and housing. This relationship is not one that we are creating tonight. It exists, and I want to honor that because housing organizers have been using oral history for many years. And so while we are using oral history as a way to talk about housing, housing organizers have been using oral history as a way to galvanize groups, to talk across difference, and also as a form of consciousness raising. So we're in good company as we bring these two things together tonight. I want to tell you that if you're a Hudson resident and haven't been interviewed for the archive, you are invited to be part of the archive, and we welcome your lived experience. We really think about oral history as a way to reckon with the past, but also think out loud about the present moment, and also think about the future. And that might mean interventions or dreams or both. And so I hope that tonight, in addition to bringing our housing questions and testimony to the table, we're also bringing some oral history passion to the room. I want to thank a few people before I hand it off to our very special community guests tonight. I want to thank Emma Brown, who's not here, who's our archives coordinator and has been working with over 500 interviews with Hudson residents to create the infrastructure so that we might listen to them tonight and after tonight. I want to thank Sarah Kendall, who started supporting this project back in 2011. And of course, I want to thank the Hudson Area Library, especially Emily, Tracy, Brenda, and to state that we have received support through the Institute of Museum and Library Services, an IMLS grant that's really being used to promote conversations, using oral history to promote community conversation. So I hope this will be one of many. Okay, so I just want to describe what I think is happening tonight, but all of you are partners in this. So if it goes off the rails and in another direction, please know I'm very content and satisfied. What I think is happening is that we're about to really give our attention to three people that I'm so honored could join us tonight. And those are Des, Claire, and Sara. And Tracy will be dropping full bios in the chat, and they'll also be introducing themselves. And I've asked that we use this first section of the night to listen to a little bit of audio from the archive to get us in that mode of listening. And then I thought I'd ask Des and Claire and Sara to introduce themselves by describing something about their work or life, and also ask them to really throw out to all of you some support they'd like to see, some support they need, and it might be very tangible or it might be abstract. And then we're going to go into the archive and listen to some excerpts with conversation time. And I'd love to hear from all of you about what you hear, themes you hear, problems you hear, and your own response to hearing the testimony. The last part of the night is really time for us to talk about why we're recording stories, listening to stories, or to carry the conversation further. But I'm really hoping that in sharing these oral histories, we can talk about gentrification with more language than the word gentrification, and that we can, as much as possible, be more specific and nuanced. And that means allowing for a lot of contradictions that you might hear or might want to contribute. So one of the things I love about oral history is getting down to that granular level, where we don't just say, I ate breakfast. We talk about what we ate for breakfast because someone cares. So I really care to hear from you, and you don't need to use jargon or language that everyone else is using. Your lived experience is valued here. Okay, so any questions before we get started from anyone here? Any questions yet? Okay. All right, well, I would like to pass things off, and I'm going to do so first. I'd like to hand things off. Actually, I am going to play audio. I'm going to play audio, and Claire, just to give you a heads up, I'm going to pass things off to you after we listen to this audio. What you're going to hear first is an interview with Cedric, and you will be getting a full playlist of these full interviews after this program tonight. If you want to listen to the interview that this excerpt came from, Cedric was interviewed by an oral history summer school student named Jalicia, and this was in 2017. So I'm going to start with this excerpt.
You know, I love the city of Hudson. I claim the city of Hudson. I take ownership of the youth in Hudson, you know, and when something uncomfortable or bad happens, I take that home with me. That's something that's on my mind. I know the problems. I know the problems in my city. You know, I help cause some of these problems in my city. You know, you can go to the doctor and say I'm sick. You know, and the doctor can sit there. You know, I think it'll be remiss for the doctor to go and start treating you without knowing what the problem is. You know, you got to ask the patient what the problem is. You know, he got to tell you the symptoms. And I correlate that to the city and the city ails. You know, a lot of people come in and they say, I'm gonna fix this city. You have no idea what you're fixing. You have no idea what the problems are. You know, I have a keen sense of what the problems are here. You know, I'm from here. You know, and not only am I from here, you know, I'm from the disenfranchised. I'm from the marginalized, you know, the economically disadvantaged. You know, some doors are open for me, you know, but let's not get that messed up. You know what I mean? I'm still in the margins. And you can, as you go up in age in this city, from what I see, and black and brown people, economically disadvantaged people, because they could be white also, you know, if they're economically disadvantaged, they're conditioned also. They, you know, it's a condition. But as you go down and you look at these young people got to fight in them. These young people, all they need is the resources. You know, all they need is space. We can educate them, and we can give them that space. We can give them that resource and stay out of their way. Stop telling them what they should be doing. They know. We should trust them. You know, and if we look at history, everything that was significant that happened and it was for positive happened from young people. Warren Street was a comfortable place to be. A lot of these stores that we could go into, and I remember going into some of these stores without a dime, and my grandparents sent me there. Particularly my grandfather sent me in the store and said, go get this. And when I went down there and I said, yeah, you know, my grandfather sent me down there. I didn't have to say a name or anything. They knew who I was. You know, this is Henry Fulton's grandson. And I would leave out of there with a bag of stuff and never had to pay for anything. My grandfather would settle that later, you know, and things like that, where now you go into a store and you don't know who these people are. You can't buy a bottle of milk. You can't buy a loaf of bread from somebody that look like me, you know. And I love my brothers and sisters on these corner stores, you know, but what can I say about Warren Street that's positive for my community? I'll waste your time. I will sit here all day talking about nothing. There's nothing. The whole city landscape is changing. You know, they call it the new gentrification. They say gentrification is good. They talk a good game and they talk about, you know, the development and things like that, and it's pushing people, black and brown and economically disadvantaged people out of this city. You know, and they're pushing them and pushing them and pushing them further into the margins. Big change. You know, there's a lot of, like they say, programming for youth. We always had something to do when we were younger. Always. You know what I mean? Now, people are fighting and tripping over themselves to make $1 and saying that they're helping young people out. You know what I mean? And I don't see it. You know, I don't see it. It's even more of a problem than it was then. You know, even then when we had a lot of things to do, you know what I mean? The city the condition was bad for young people in Hudson. It's worse now. This city, there's a lot of potential in this city. We just got to get out of our own way. There's a lot of racism in this city, man, there's a lot of racism in this city that certain people won't speak of. But again, these young people had no problem facing that, you know what I mean, and wanting to do something about that. Whereas before, it was get along, go along to get along. You know, maybe that's one of the positives. You know, but you look at Columbia Street, you look at Lower State Street, you look at Providence Hall, Bliss Tower, the Low Rise, Schuyler Court, Hudson Terrace. No different than what it was 30 years ago. It's no difference. The same people is there. The same condition is there. You know what I mean? But certain people are trying to capitalize on that. And when they capitalize on that, those same people that's there, that been there, will not be there. You know what I mean? Where they gonna be? Where they gonna be?
Okay, so we're starting there with that excerpt from Cedric's interview from 2017. And Tracy is putting the link to the archive if you'd like to listen to the full interview. And, you know, we're not going to open up to comment yet, but anything you're thinking and feeling right now can be brought forward into this conversation. And one helpful way that we can have conversations around narrative is to think about what you heard, not just what you know already, but what you just learned, what you just heard, what you think this narrator is trying to tell us, and how you feel listening to it. I'm going to, so feel free while it's fresh to put things in the chat as I turn the night over to Claire, our first community leader, and I'm calling all three of our guest community guides tonight in this conversation. Claire's full bio is in the chat, dropped in by Tracy, but Claire is, among many other things, a lead organizer with the Hudson Catskill Housing Coalition. And Claire has done amazing work for many years. Claire's bio includes her work as a 28-year-old single mother of 3. Also her work as an educator, her work with Staley B. Keith Social Justice Center. And again, just to remind you that I've asked all three of our guests to, in about 5 minutes, start our night off by telling us a little bit about who they are, how they spend their time, and what they want from us. So Claire, can I hand it over to you, please?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Claire Cousin. I am the Hudson lead organizer for the Hudson Catskill Housing Coalition. I will introduce myself again as a single mother raising 3 children in Hudson. As my bio states, my work started out with youth work, and it's my passion. I don't consider anything that I do to be work. I think the reason people began listening to my voice is because I don't see any of the jobs I do as work. I come from a place of experience, and I'm unapologetic about my experience and using my experience to power how I show up in spaces and how I show up on behalf of my community. And like I said, that started with youth. I grew up in Hudson and Greenport. My family lived in Greenport, but most of my family lived in downtown Hudson. And my family moved to Greenport because we were not poor enough to live in subsidized housing, but did not have enough money to live in an actual suburb. And that's kind of what Greenport is. So I have, as a biracial person, I have multiple experiences that fuel the way that I show up. I think listening to Cedric's excerpt is kind of a full circle moment for me. And it makes me want to reiterate the fact that some of the people that you see constantly that show up as the community leaders are only considered experts because we found power in our narrative. And our goal in the work that we do is to help other people find that power so that they're able to be comfortable to show up in the rooms and have their voice represented and have a different idea around politics and community engagement. Because in all honesty, politics is nothing more than people getting together and sharing their opinions and experiences and letting that guide, that vehicle be how they get things done in the city. Yeah, I mean, that's, I think Credible Messengers is what my goal is to create in all of the work that I do. Every title that I hold, I'm thinking of ways to bring people with similar experiences or different experiences to the table and understand that the platform is there and it's for the taking and it's for the people that want to keep Hudson. I think that's another important thread that I want folks on this panel to remember, that Hudson is changing very fast. But the thing that draws people to Hudson is the culture that has lived here and been cultivated here for generations. And when you push those community members out, you lose that. And Hudson will no longer be the place that everybody desires because that culture will slowly leave. So I guess that's my introduction. If I could ask anything of the people listening to this, it would be to find the power and find the use in storytelling and listening to somebody's lived experience, and believe what they say of their experience first before asking for the statistics and the facts to back what they're saying. Listen to what they're describing as what their Hudson was and what's hurtful about the happening in Hudson at this moment and why they show up the way they show up. And just honor the fact that people that do show up, just because they're not speaking statistics and housing facts from around the nation, doesn't mean that they are not experts on what housing should be in Hudson.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you for responding also as part of your introduction to Cedric's narrative. I know that Claire will be coming back with your voice throughout this night, but I would love to pass things along now to Des, and Dezjuan Smith was willing to come and speak about experience at the intersection of housing and education. And I'm sure what's already clear is that talking about housing in Hudson means talking about a lot of other things as well. And so I think we're probably going to end up broadening what this conversation is about, and hopefully at the end of the night, refocusing it on housing, but there are a lot of other displacement triggers to discuss and things that go into housing decisions and policy and experiences. Des is 17 years old and is a photographer and student, has taken on the roles of activist and organizer because of the increasing need for housing. And Des, I'm going to let you say more. Des's bio will also be in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. So I'm Dezjuan, 17, and yeah, I'm a senior enrolled at Hawthorne Valley Waldorf School. So I guess I'll just say that I've been involved in sort of like community organizing work around housing for a few years now. Like it says in my bio, it was sort of just like I felt sort of like an obligation to, as a person of color, as someone who comes from a low income community or, low income family. And so I was like, well, who else can really, say these things, and say it truthfully? I just hope that like, anything I say can be like heard and speaking from just experience, because as Claire said, I don't really have like, a list of statistics and whatever. It's just like me and, just sort of like my like voice. Um, in terms of education, I've definitely been someone who's like struggled in school a lot, just academically. And I've been thinking about that more actually recently, constantly being told all these things about sort of like my potential and all this room I have and are sort of like my capacity for certain things. But yet, like, why can't I seem to like get it together, for lack of a better word? And like really dedicate myself to school. And, and thinking about that, especially now that I, am enrolling in colleges and stuff around this time, has led me to think about just my, my background, my housing history, and how that's always been marked with instability and the things that can really do to a child growing up, whether they like consciously know it or not. It still definitely takes its toll. Some days just like going to school and just like sitting down at the desk and then like feeling scattered because it's like, well, you don't even have really like a home, or you don't really have like a adequate housing space. So how do you sit down and do this English test or history test or whatever? And so that's always been something, you know that's always something I thought like that should definitely be considered, more. We do talk about the children a lot, like, do we really actually look for like insight, to like what that means? Do we talk to like our children about like what it really is like, instead of speaking about them as sort of a, in theory. Um, and just hearing Cedric's recording just made me think about sort of there's a lot of pain there in that recording, but what came out from it, to me anyway, was just a lot of love, and a lot of love for the community, just very strong, vocal love. And I think like that those that language that he uses is one that we should internalize more. Words like, like "our" and like "we" and like things like that that unifies us like as a community. I feel like if we can really, we know that there's like despair, in our community in terms of housing and all these other issues, and we've always known about this despair. But if we highlight, our love for each other and our community, then maybe we can, we can get everyone together and fully support initiatives to take care of one another. And so, I don't necessarily have like the solutions right now. I might have like some suggestions that could potentially be solutions. I'm not sure, but I am offering just my like support for whatever someone feels needs to be done in this crazy time, of just like instability. Um, and I guess that's what I ask of just like any community listeners too, is just like support and that on that, and kind of just like reiterating what Claire said, just listen to a story, listen to an experience and just take it in, as it is. I feel like so many people like to sound intellectual or lose academic language or whatever those things mean, but like are you really saying anything if you're not even making it like accessible, if you're not really like communicating. And the best way to communicate is really just like from the heart. So I think that yeah, I think that's all I can really think to say right now. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Des. I really appreciate that call to speak in language that is familiar and meaningful. And I hope that all of us, as we're listening to anyone speaking, whether they're here with us in this room or whether we're listening to recorded narrative, that you can be thinking about what you're hearing and how this relates to your life. And that is something you can share in the chat or out loud. But I really would like to offer our narrators some feedback that we're here and we hear them. So thank you, Des. And I'm now going to pass things off to Sara. And Sara Black is the administrative director of the HCDPA, which maybe Sara will tell us about. And Sara is also finishing a dissertation focused on racialized displacement in the Hudson Valley. Sara is from Birmingham, Alabama, and currently lives on Clinton Street. And Sara, I would love to ask you to join.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Dezjuan and Claire. It's a tough act to follow, but a pleasure to be here with some of the smartest people that I know. Okay, so yep, Sara moved here from Athens, Georgia. I'm a Southerner, and I moved to Hudson because I was interested in farming. In 2012 was the first time that I moved here. Which for some people might feel like before things got really bad, and for others is sort of deep into the process of gentrification in Hudson. But I know that when I moved here, friends of mine had apartments on Warren Street for like the $350 in that sort of range. So a lot's changed since then. And I worked a lot of odd jobs in town. I was a bread baker and a cater waiter, and I worked for a nonprofit that was headquartered here called the National Young Farmers Coalition. But the thing that really changed my life was working with a man named Jalal Sabur, who's a Kite's Nest educator and a farmer and a prison abolitionist. And I worked with him on something called the Victory Bus Project, which I don't have enough time to go into, but it's a farmer-led project that seeks to build community around ending mass incarceration. And working a lot of jobs and working for Jalal, I think I just sort of met the end of what I knew as an organizer. I had an organizing background. I felt like I really needed to learn more about why gentrification and other like racialized crises that are all interrelated, right? Gentrification, food apartheid, mass incarceration are all tied together. And I didn't know how to talk about why. And I felt like I needed to do that and to learn that. So I went to graduate school to study urban geography with some folks who really think about the intersection of those things. And while I was in grad school, I also learned some like little technical skills around statistics and stuff like that. And in 2019, Rebecca Wolf knew that about me. We were neighbors, and she asked for my help putting together an application for a grant for the city of Hudson to build a set of programs to fight displacement and gentrification. And so after like a long process with a lot of people who were mostly not me putting together an application, the city got $1 million to start to try to confront the racialized displacement that was happening in Hudson. And we did a lot of things. We started an emergency rent relief program. We hired a housing justice director to give the city really like the kinds of technical capacity that we need to apply for the kinds of grants that we have to get to build new apartments. And the housing, this grant that I'm describing has a lot of really like technical, I had to teach myself a lot of really wonky and technical things about this sort of solution side of what do we do in a city where all the buildings are now so expensive because all of these people want to live here because, like Claire was saying, it's this culture of a small town that's very attractive to a particular set of people that happens to have all of this preserved historic architecture that like creates a feeling that people like me who are maybe tired of living in New York City find really attractive. And then there are people with disposable income who are willing to spend a lot of money on a home. And then once that home sells, then the owner is paying a mortgage on it, and that's a lot higher than the last owner. And so we get caught in this cycle where the rents and the expenses just keep going up and up and up. And one of the only ways out of that is going to be to build new units, or to build new homes for people, to build new apartments. So that's part of what this grant is hoping to accomplish. Wow, 5 minutes went by fast. One of the things that we're doing is starting a Hudson Housing Trust Fund, or we're calling it the Housing Fund. We're using most of this $100,000 to go into a pot of money that we can use to sort of work towards some of these again, like very big packages of, it's sort of dizzying sometimes how much it takes to to build a new building. But we're investing to start from this grant about $600,000 to create a pot of money that we can use to run sewer lines or run tests, soil tests and things like that. All these things that if anyone's paid attention to the recent like housing, like the Galvin project on 7th Street or the Pocketbook Factory, if you're paying attention to some of these things, you might start to learn, as I have, like what has to come together to build new structures. We also hired Pattern for Progress to, one of the members of whom is here today, to create like a development plan so we could figure out which properties the city owns and sort of and start to make a plan to create new housing on city-owned land. And well, over time, the new thing that happened to me in the wake of working on this grant was that the Hudson Community Development Planning Agency is the urban renewal agency for the city of Hudson. Urban renewal was a period in the 60s and 70s and 80s of where the federal government, the United States government, started spending a lot of money, sending a lot of money to cities all over the country because we had what they perceived as a crisis of urban, of blight, of substandard housing conditions. But it was really what I learned in graduate school too, and what anybody who experienced this in real time will tell you, is that it was this real racialized program of clearing working class neighborhoods full of working class people of color, and tearing down all of these houses and creating clear land so that cities could build new developments on top of them. And in Hudson, the Hudson Community Development and Planning Agency is the agency behind clearing the land, and that made way for the building of Bliss Towers and the Hudson Terraces, as well as doing a lot of the historic preservation work that made Warren Street such an attractive place. And this agency has been dormant for about 40 years after those projects were done. Urban renewal really fell out of favor, in part because there was a clear community outrage around the destruction of so many communities and the displacement of so many people. So I just wanted briefly to show you one thing. If you'll give me just a second here. It's here. This is some of the documents that I found when I was digging through the archive of the Hudson Urban Renewal Agency. These were comprehensive plans that were put together to make plans for the creation of Bliss and the Hudson Terraces, and really to account for destroying the communities that were there before. Here's some of the models that they were showing about the creation of these communities and the construction. That they really talked about it as this positive thing because they talked about the communities there being, the homes being substandard and full of rodents and things like that. But a lot of this language was really about justifying displacing, acres and acres and acres of homes full of people. And one of the most important things I can show you is that the archive of all of the displacement that took place looks like this. It's in the Dunn warehouse on the waterfront. This is the record of all of the evictions that took place, all of the notes about how to relocate people. One of my projects as the administrative coordinator is going to be dealing with this, and I need help figuring out how to make this information available to the people that were impacted by urban renewal, and also how to use this material to connect it to the contemporary crisis of displacement that we're in, including the displacement that may be taking place with Bliss Towers and redevelopment there. And I also want to really invite people to, gosh, I've gone so far over time, to pay attention to what's going to be happening with the Hudson Housing Fund, because the crisis that we're in is solvable, and we need community leadership, and we need to teach each other what this needs to look like in order for it to be just. And we can do that by following the leadership of HCHC and people like Claire, and of SJLA and the youth in Hudson and people like Des. And so, yeah, I've gone so far over time. I should probably stop there. But I just want to invite people to, Joe Chaika is going to post a link in the chat about a housing forum that's being scheduled for next week. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are going to be happening here soon to try to address some of these problems. So I look forward to talking more about it.
Thank you, Sarah, so much. Okay, so I really appreciate that our three guests have sort of primed the surface with some of their experience and their own focus in terms of their life and work. And I hope we can bring all these threads through tonight. And I'm going to ask our three guests to close us out tonight too, and of course to participate as you wish throughout the night. And I see some people using the chat both for resources, and it's also really helpful to give feedback, encouragement, or the kind of just cues and clues you would offer socially if we were all in a room together. So please feel free to use that space in many ways. I would like to turn to some of the audio now. I think that in true oral history fashion, we're kind of broadening the scope of the conversation before we bear down on it. So a lot of things, like I said, are going to come up that go beyond housing, but are related to housing. And I just want to mention how I picked 5 clips tonight to play, and I selected them. There were many, many to choose from, but I wanted to put forward some things that might serve as provocations or might represent a particular part of this complex sort of problem and constellation. So I will start by playing another clip from Hallie. I feel inspired by what Des said, not just talking about children and young people, but talking to young people. And so I'm going to play this clip. Hallie was interviewed in 2018, if that helps in terms of timing.
What about when you were small? Like younger than I am now. I never really got to walk outside by myself. So now that I'm older, I can like go lots of places. My mom, sometimes when she's not feeling so well and she's home, she'll send me out to the store. So I don't really, Warren Street was like the only street that really mattered. Warren Street and Front Street. Those are the only places. That's the only streets I can really fully remember, is because when I was little, that's where I lived. And that it was where I lived, where my family lives, and, you know, the street where they have all the parades and the fireworks and, you know, all that good stuff. So those are really the only places that mattered to me when I was a kid, because I didn't really know what the rest of Hudson was like since I lived in that one place, which is Skylar Court, for so long.
Where have you wanted to live?
I like to read. So most of the characters I read in my books, as in books that, you know, I like to read about things, you know, like any other book, because books have stories in them. Obviously, it's a book. But I've always really wanted to live in like a somewhat kind of suburb-like place, because like it's kind of boring when you think about it, but honestly, it's just somewhere peaceful, and like you can go in your backyard if you want. You can do whatever you want, you know. You can paint your room. You can have pets, you know, without a problem. I mean, to be honest, I think it would be more work for my mom if we lived in like a house. So, and since she kind of like, it's just me and my little brother and my cat living together, it would be a lot difficult for her. But where I've wanted to live is definitely more of like a sort of kind of peaceful place that has its things to do, but isn't like always crazy or always packed. Like a very calm neighborhood, I guess I could say. Far from Hudson.
What would you want to be different than Hudson?
Different than Hudson. Just, I don't know. There's just, I guess it's kind of hard to explain, because the people here, I don't know. the things that they have, the opportunities that they have for jobs for adults is like very low. Like you can work at a store, or you work at, you know, the school district. So it's like the only place for you to work. So it's really hard for people to actually live nicely in Hudson. So I definitely would want somewhere, like if I were to move right now and like everything could be done and packed up for me and all that cool stuff, because that would be cool. I would like to have somewhere not only good for me, but somewhere good for my family, and as in my mom and my little brother, because I love my family, but I don't want to see them every day. But somewhere good for my family, you know, to live, and somewhere nice for my mom to work, you know, because she's always like working. She doesn't really get lots of breaks. So I would just like somewhere kind of good for all of us, which maybe most of it only existent in my imagination, but I guess there would just be so many, but so little differences than Hudson in the place that I would want to live.
What would you want to be the same?
It's like kind of the opposite of what I said before about Hudson, which is that it's not this perfect, peaceful place. It's not exactly a war zone either to most people, even the people who live in the different areas, you know. It's not crazy like New York City or something like that. It's like that, but like kind of watered down. It's like Hudson is like, it has all these parks and all these places for kids and stuff like that, places for kids to do, and their kids like to do things, you know, like clubhouses and like programs. Like our school district literally has its own after school program, which is really cool for like parents who work late and stuff like that. Even though they get home like around 6 o'clock, that's when the program ends. You know, they provide food and transportation for the kids that go to the program. And, you know, they do things with them there. I mean, duh, it's a program. You're supposed to do things with the kids that they like. You know, there's lots of opportunities for children. And there is things for adults to do, but that's like for like artsy people who don't really have much to worry about except for like what they want to do with their lives. You know, for people with families, it's a lot more difficult to find like good living places, you know. That's how I think about most of the things for this town. And I noticed that, you know, over time there was a lot of other people who shared the same specific needs for living in like, you know, an area. But yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I want to open up the floor and, or the room, I guess, and everyone here is qualified to participate. You are alive and here, and that means we're interested in what you heard, how you feel. People who want to start making connections between what you heard and our housing questions, feel free to do that. But we also value any response to what you just heard that's emotional or descriptive. Who wants to start?
I can. Listening to the different narratives, for me, makes it further sows the thread of the beauty of Hudson, because the reality is, and when you really get to listening to people's experiences, it is the tale of two cities. There are two realities that are happening. And I'll speak directly to Haley's piece first, because from an outside looking in, there is this wonderful long-standing after-school program, and on paper there are these really rich youth programs. But for us that are fighting the battles in the community on the ground, we know that the reality is there is an entire population of young people that are missed by those programs and whose families are not served by those beautiful entities. They don't fit into the parameters a lot of times of what a grant is asking a program to do. And a lot of programs go for the money with stipulations, regardless of the actual needs in the community. One of my philosophies when it comes to organizing is that I will never plan on behalf of my community. I will always plan with my community, because that it's hurtful to see all of these things come to fruition and like have to learn about them without being asked. It's offensive. And I think that's where a lot of people in power in Hudson get it wrong. They forget that step, and it's an easy step, and it's not these long thought out surveys and community needs assessments. It's one-on-ones, and it's listening to these interviews from the oral history program and walking from Union Street to Columbia Street and seeing somebody at the corner store and having a conversation, and that would weave back together the reality of the two Hudsons. You would find more similarities than disparities. And I think that's what really drives me in the work that I do, because I think that I have enough of a bad experience in Hudson to also be able to help people see that like there is beauty in it. There is like, I'm not going anywhere because I had a bad experience in Hudson, because I also had a really rich experience in Hudson. I was fortunate enough to find the other programs for young people that existed in Hudson. I was fortunate enough to be able to watch Maya Angelou read live poetry because of a different kind of youth program that I had. I was able to see Queen Latifah sing blues music, which I had no idea she made, because of a different kind of youth programming. And I left Hudson to see those things. Somebody took a chance to take me out of the city of Hudson to experience life. And by experiencing life, I decided that I want to stay in Hudson and help it remain Hudson, but also thrive in a different way. And I think that there's nothing wrong with wanting to stay in Hudson. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think that there's many ways to make that happen. So just like hearing the difference between what Cedric was saying about we're fighting the fight because we want to keep Hudson, and hearing Haley's experience of it's lots of things to do, but it's not necessarily the place that I want to be. And like understanding that's a beautiful privilege to have that lens. And thanking her for sharing that, because a lot of people are uncomfortable to say those things because of the difference in the realities in Hudson.
Thank you so much. Who else would like to join and reflect on what Claire just said, or Haley started us off with? Sarah, are you jumping in?
I was thinking about it. Yeah, I want to affirm that what Claire said about the kinds of community leadership that is required to have, I don't know, I don't want to sound like I'm talking to a nonprofit or something, but to put together the kinds of solutions that can be just, and that the folks that are working on doing that in Hudson are, I think, aligned in that vision, but need to be held accountable. And this is myself included. Like, we all need to continue to be held accountable to that. Yeah.
Thank you. Who else wants to jump in? And feel free, we don't need anything especially clever. Some of the work that would be helpful right now is to just list what we're hearing as part of the housing conversation. What are people wanting to talk about when asked questions about gentrification in Warren Street? What are people describing and talking about?
I just wanted to say that, you know, the people that I know, they always say that the stores there are not for us. I live in Greenport, so when I go shopping, I go to Walmart, I'm on Fairview. That's where I go, you know, and other places, because on Warren Street, the only place I go would be to like the second sale, and I go to the library or to the post office. But when I walk up and down on Warren Street, it's crowded. It seems like there's a lot of tourists there, and it's for people coming from New York City, and they have all this money to spend in these furniture stores that are really like almost like antique shops and the art galleries. It's like a Fifth Avenue type of situation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Suzanne.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Please.
my name is Joe Chaika. Work for Pattern for Progress, but I'm here tonight. Not really as Pattern. I'm here as a person who was born in Hudson, was raised in Hudson and Livingston, and I remember as a kid in the early '70s going up and down Warren Street, and it was a very different place. Used to run into a little toy store called the Town Fair, where you could buy a little plastic car for a dime. And those cute little quaint shops are not there anymore. And I feel that over the past few decades, those little businesses have been displaced. People have been displaced. And I think hearing the recorded comments and hearing from the live folks tonight, it's confirmed a lot of what we have been hearing during our research for the housing plan itself, and it makes me even appreciate more some of what the potential solutions could be to create more affordable options for people to remain in Hudson and for the city to grow, and to not necessarily get back to where it was, but to grow into the 21st century, where it is perhaps a little bit more in balance, and where you know people have an option to stay, and it concerns me as a native of the area that those options may be running out very quickly, and it's very sad. And I can hear when I'm listening, I can hear the struggles, I can hear the pain, and I can hear a little bit of, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And it's important. We just spent 3 hours literally on the sidewalk in the city of Poughkeepsie, listening to housing challenges of people in that city. And it's very, as much as we hear it from people that are in elected positions, people that are running a business, people that are representing other people's, it's really important to hear it directly from a person living. in the situation. And it just gives you more of a appreciation for what's happening. So those are my observations, and I really, really enjoy listening to this and being part of it. So thank you for putting it on.
Thank you. I see Mandy's hand. Let's hear from Mandy, and then we'll play some more audio and continue this. Mandy.
Hi. Thanks everyone for speaking on this and coming together. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and listen. I was thinking about Haley's talking about the connection, just making the connections of between her mom, working all the time, and her housing, and the line she said about I'm trying to remember it the way that she said it, but it was something like, she was talking about youth programming, but she was talking about adult programming. Essentially, she was talking about like things for adults to do. And she was saying like, the only thing that was so many of what was happening in terms of adults being together and having events was for people who have enough time to think about what they want to do with their lives. Is that what she said? Something like that. Sort of given this sort of like, I was thinking about like, yeah, people who have enough money to have leisure, people who have enough money to not worry, to not have these worries that are sort of like taking up space. And so I was just thinking about how stable housing is such an important factor in people being able to know what they like and feel pleasure and have fun with their friends. Like those things, those are important parts of life. And also connecting that sort of feeling to what Dezjuan was saying earlier about, being able to feel like you can be present in school, these things that are connected to just having a comfortable, stable, warm, and comfortable place to live. So I'm just sitting with those thoughts right now, and I wanted to share that with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Keep in mind, if you have other reflections or feedback or feelings about listening, those will be invited again after we listen to the next narrative. And I thought for our next excerpt, we'd actually hear from a landlord, and many of you in Hudson will be familiar, I'm sure, with our narrator. And this is Phil speaking to Mike. So we have Phil Gellert speaking to Mike Zrid, and this is in 2014. And I want to be clear about the timing, since we've been interviewing for over 10 years, and some people have been interviewed 3 times over the course of 10 years as their lives change and as Hudson changes. This is about 7 minutes long.
And about 40 years ago, you could buy a farm and it was like spinning a top. You could make enough money from the farm to carry the cost. Taxes were very low, and I could make enough money from the farm to carry the cost of the acquisition. So I was a dairy farmer. I had 4 grape vineyards, fruit farm, Christmas tree, beef cattle, and accumulated about a little over 4,000 acres. But the land needed income, and the agricultural income was not sufficient to fully support the farm, so I went into the rental business. First out of the city of Hudson, elsewhere in Columbia County, a little over 40 years ago. Almost 40 years ago, Charles Nichols, who was a vice president of a local bank, a mortgage officer, called me and asked me if I'd like to buy a building from the bank at 525 Prospect Street. He said he'd sell me this building, nothing down, but the bank would like to sell it because they had an old lady who lived there who just wouldn't pay the mortgage, and he felt they would get a lot of bad publicity if they tried to evict her. So that was my first acquisition in Hudson almost 40 years ago. Turns out that this lady was a little odd. She had monkeys in her house. So I went to the neighbors were complaining about the smell from the monkeys. I asked Dale Ralph from the Board of Health what he could do. He said there's nothing in Hudson's zoning code against monkeys. So it was sort of a problem. The neighbors would complain but wouldn't file a petition. Health department couldn't do anything. And the lady, on top of that, wouldn't pay me my rent money either. Finally, she gave me a bad check, and when I threatened to press charges, she said she would move to Albany. And to my surprise, slowly she paid everything that she owed. It doesn't happen too often that happens. Over the years, I accumulated about 40 buildings in Hudson. I sold 18, which leaves me with 22. I have one under contract now that I expect to be selling this month. Some of the buildings, I've invested in 4 of the 22 buildings that I have now in the last 3 years. The big difference now is that it's accelerating at a much faster pace. When I bought this building for $13,000, it took probably 30 years or 28 years to accumulate up to $85,000. Then in 8 years, it tripled very fast, and I think that's what's happening. I see many of the buildings that I've sold in Hudson in the last few years where in a 2-year period they'll change ownership, and I think it's wonderful because you have a different lifestyle in Hudson, which has a lot of advantages. The one big disadvantage of what's happening in Hudson is it's making it a lot harder to be a landlord. For example, when I bought a building on State Street, I think that was 1968, one tenant was in that building for 47 years. Another tenant was there for 29 years. Now as a landlord, I'm lucky to have tenants stay 2 years, 3 years. You have a transit population. A lot of the people who lived in Hudson for years and raised their family in Hudson, unfortunately are moving out of Hudson. You also have a problem in Hudson that it's not affordable for a lot of people. We have no vacancies. I can't think of a period of time that I've had no vacancies in Hudson for this long a period. That's because as I and as others sell properties in Hudson, like this building I happen to be selling to Eric Galloway, there aren't any tenants involved, but if there are, they'll require all the tenants to vacate. And it's making it extremely hard for a tenant to be in Hudson and to find a place to live at an affordable level. I don't know where there are landlords that are renting to the local people, the people that are lower wage earners, and it's a difficult. It's a lot more difficult to rent to some of the people now than it was 15 or 20 years ago. We used to do one eviction a year. Now I'm in Hudson Court continuously. Okay, we have about 60 some odd buildings, and only about a third are in Hudson, but 90% of our problems are in Hudson. We have some very good tenants, but it's hard to get very good tenants in the city of Hudson. Now maybe this will change because there are no vacancies. We can be more selective. But we went through a period until recently where you could not be as selective as you would like. I think you see signs. You see a building on Warren Street. I noticed this week. I don't know if they'll get it, but they're advertising it for $1,999,999. I mean, it's just it's sort of mind-boggling.
A huge shift.
I remember I bought a building which I still own at 449, 451 State Street, and bought it in 1968, and it was next to a bar, Charlie's Bar, whatever you called it. About 6 years after I bought it, I rented to an African-American girl named Ramel Hemingway. Right away, the bartender came out and said, "I'm ruining the neighborhood. That we don't want any colored or any African Americans in this part of the town." I reminded him that it was the United States and I'm free to rent to whoever I want to rent. And if he doesn't like it, too bad. But he went out of his way for years to make trouble for me because this is what I did.
Okay, I really want to hear from you all. And someone in this room, no names mentioned, just texted me. This should get people talking. I hope that you will now feel free to respond to what you heard. Tell me what you feel. Monica.
Hi. Yeah, that was very reactivating. I grew up in affordable housing, and I know what I feel emotional right now. I know what it's like to have a mom who couldn't afford rent, and in spite of being in affordable housing, often having to be late, writing a check to buy time to grab a few extra days in hopes that she could scramble and rearrange things to make it work. And so I resent the framing of categorizing somebody as a good tenant or a bad tenant based on their ability to pay for one of the most essential things that people need, and rather than looking at it as a person with financial stability versus not enough money, it doesn't make a person good or bad. And, maybe this person is keeping their apartment well and is, a consistent good person in a million other ways, and their lack of funds so often gets relegated. People without enough money are often just considered trying to get away with something, lazy, trying to, do something that is just wrong. And the words are failing me right now. And it just makes me so angry. And when we look at so many of the causes of why people don't have enough money, then they're traced back to systemic inequities that are built in. I'm studying economics now, and part of it is towards community economic development, and the grotesqueness of how so many inequities are literally built into our system. Somebody spoke earlier about having too much money for affordable housing, but not enough money to afford a house, right? And I think that those things are by design. And it's, so that's what I have to say about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Monica. And I want to make clear that I did not pick this clip in order to inflame, but I did think it was important because oral history excels at really collecting nuanced narrative. And I wanted to make sure that we heard how a range of people are talking about housing in Hudson, and to hear from the language people are using, their frames of reference. I think it's important for our conversation too. Does anyone want to talk about what you heard, how you feel, make connections? Anyone else? Des.
I mean, I just like, I'm almost like thankful for some of like that interview and like the things he said, because it's kind of like, it's a good reminder that the apathy is here. It is like right here, like in our streets. The people in power, or people with money, which I guess equals power, don't necessarily, just do not really care about the displacement of people. He said the hardest part right now, because of all the moving and tourism stuff, is that it's harder to be a landlord. And I think that's just like, and he just said it, and he didn't think more of anything else after. And I think it's kind of just like, I mean, I'm sorry if I'm like speaking too much from a place of just like anger or something. It's just like, I've never really been a money driven person. So anytime I get a perspective like that, it's very shocking to me about how much you can really care so much about a concept, just a concept like money, instead of like a tangible, life. And I think that, I mean, I don't know. I just think that like, I don't want to like tell people like how to feel about money or capitalism or whatever. I just think, I always just think, like consider the source of like so many of our problems, and what it really does lead back to at the end of the day, because gentrification, it is tearing apart our city and many other cities in this nation too. And so it's like, it is a phenomenon that is destroying so many communities. And so where does it all really come back to? And I think that's really just how I'm feeling. Consider the source of it all.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that response, and you're bringing our attention even to a very specific line that was uttered by our narrator. And I see Sarah's hand. Sarah.
Yeah, I feel like this part really speaks to the, I don't know, I'm not somebody who hates like mom and pop landlords, although I think that's a categorization that people deploy politically, often to like insulate themselves from criticism. Like, oh, I'm local, I'm just a small landlord. Landlords support the community too. And I think there are people who are landlords who are good people, but I think what Phil, I put it in the chat, I was like, he's really saying the quiet part out loud, in part because he talks about how easy it is for him to accumulate property. And he doesn't say why. We don't know what his like economic circumstances are, but we do know the history of the creation of the racial wealth gap in property. It has to do with exactly how Monica was saying it. It has to do with, it's a structure, it's intentional, that the whole structure of American law has transformed itself over and over again since the beginning, to prevent, I mean, I don't even think it's hyperbole to say like it's still exactly the same, but to really prevent the accumulation of wealth among people who are not part of the owning class. And then that really meant through things like many of us probably know the histories of redlining or even urban renewal, right? Like urban renewal, when cities like Hudson were given federal money to buy parcels of land so that they could tear the buildings down and build something on it, or attract developers to build things on it. It's not like we were paying like extremely good prices for those properties, even though a lot of those people who were displaced were tenants themselves. But plenty of homeowners got the short end of the deal, and there's been so many different ways throughout history that Black and brown homeowners have been prevented from building intergenerational wealth. And Phil Gellert comes in here and he's like, oh yeah, but I had like 40,000 acres or whatever, 40 buildings in Hudson. And a thing that I really lose sleep over sometimes is how in other cities that have more space and more vacant buildings, there's a strategy that communities put together where they initiate a community land trust, where it's a group of people who start buying properties to keep them permanently out of the speculative market, right? To keep them, to never sell them, to keep them in trust so that they remain permanently affordable. And what he's talking about, like these houses selling every 2 years, is when people come in and flip houses to make money. And that process has been is just like gasoline on the fire of property values changing in Hudson, and people like Phil Gellert have absolutely been a part of that. Also, people like Phil Gellert have been widely regarded as being slumlords and not investing in decent housing for people. So that interview made me not inflamed, but he said the quiet parts out loud.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to respond at this time? Vanessa and then Michelle.
What I wanted to say was that this is what's happened in New York City. It started in Queens, in Astoria. People would buy, houses, and then they would, sell them at a, much higher price. People even, rented places, apartments, and the rents kept going up. And the same thing in Brooklyn, and it's starting in the Bronx. And a lot of people are moving out of New York City because of that. Before I moved out of New York City, in Brooklyn, one-bedroom apartments in 2019 were going for $1,900 a month. And that is really out of my budget. And a lot of people, were moving out and still are.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michelle.
Hey everyone. So I work for the city as a housing justice director, which is Sarah alluded to the grant, and that's under that. But I guess I wanted to say, really building off what Vanessa just said, something I think about a lot and hear from other people is we're talking a lot about, keeping Hudson, preserving it, and how to protect people's stories and their lives, but then also how a lot of new residents who've moved in here have been displaced themselves. And so also coming with your own story of displacement. And I moved here for work and for family reasons, but lived in New Orleans, and I had to move quite a bit because of apartments, rental increases. And I think it's as someone who's new to the city, trying to figure out how do you reconcile being new, having everyone who moved here lived somewhere else, right? And we all come with that story, but then how do you also feel part of the community and respect the community that is here? And I mean, from like the technical side, Sarah said, we have space to build more units. There's a lot of things that can do policy wise, but I guess in terms of like community wise, that's something that I'm trying to figure out. How do you feel part of a community that exists and that's new, and how do you respect that? But then also everyone coming here, we all came from places for a reason as well.
Thank you. And I'm hoping we have so much expertise in this room. And I know some people are quiet and tired, but I'm hoping that people in the room who are involved in programs and projects and initiatives can answer some of the really good questions Michelle just asked. So there are obviously some tangible ways people can participate and then some more abstract building that's needed. Does anyone want to share some of the ways that your coalition building or addressing housing issues in Hudson, especially if you're looking for people to get involved? Does anyone want to jump in? You know, oral historians are very comfortable with silence, so I will accidentally sit here for a long time. Does anyone want to talk about something that you're involved in? Monica.
Hi again. So the project I'm working on is very much in its infant stages, but as I mentioned how I grew up before, one of the things I'm looking at in terms of thinking about gentrification, and I'm somebody who has moved from Riverdale in the Bronx to Tribeca to several parts in San Francisco and know what it's like to kind of keep being displaced. I keep thinking about less about the people who come to a community and buy property and thereby displaced, especially as Sarah mentioned, they get a new mortgage, they've got higher carrying costs and so on. And more about why are the people in the community vulnerable to being displaced to begin with, right? And how can we look at those inequities and those barriers to entry for people to own their own homes? We've got people here in Hudson, and I'm speaking about this from my background in the city as well, who have lived in their communities for generations but are still vulnerable to being displaced like that. And what I'm interested in is looking at all of the structures that keep that in place and how we can shift that. During Hurricane Sandy, I did a lot of work with small businesses in Red Hook, Brooklyn, which is my community. And, one of the things we looked at was if the small businesses had the opportunity to buy their own buildings when they came up for sale, instead of having somebody else buy them, that would create an opportunity. I don't like the term generational wealth, but generational financial stability. It would also let the business stay in place. So we often speak about, in Brooklyn, it was Van Brunt Street. Here it's Warren Street. This street isn't for me anymore. The stores aren't there for me anymore. If we could keep those businesses in place, then that keeps the community dynamic with a variety of businesses that serve a variety of people. If people can keep home ownership, then there's a fluidity of people coming and going in a community that has a little bit more of a natural evolution and less this forced, it's hip, it's hot, new people come and displace the old people. So I'm really thinking about it from that perspective. And as I said, it's very much in its infancy and I'm doing a lot of research right now, but that to me is a really interesting conversation. And the one other element that I'm interested in is looking at how these things can be done as a social entrepreneurship approach and less about government funded things that come along with all the handcuffs, the restrictions on, who can live in a place, what you can resell it for. I think making affordable housing that lower income people can only resell at a small margin above what they paid for keeps them financially insecure. If somebody gets to be able to buy a house, they should, like everyone else in society, be able to sell it and be able to have something to keep their family stable ongoingly. So that's the conversation I'm in.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to share? And if you're not up to doing that out loud in the chat also, we're looking for projects, programs, initiatives. Just feeling the sort of the sense that we're in a listening stance in this room right now. I think I want to play some more audio, knowing that this is a huge conversation. We hosted a conversation about housing. Some of you may have been there in 2013 at the First Presbyterian Church in collaboration with Housing is a Human Right. And there was so much momentum at that meeting, and our biggest mistake was not having a second meeting a month later. And so I know that a lot might be whipped up or sort of inspired or inspiring, but needing some direction in terms of where to take the conversation, I think is important. So in some sense, this conversation might help us figure out what we want to talk about. And I would love to play 2 more clips for you, but please interrupt the flow of listening if you want to speak or respond. I'm going to play now a clip from, I think I'll play Mary Howell. And this is kind of thinking about some of Sarah's questions in terms of the legacy of urban renewal and what it did and what we do now about what it did. And I thought that Mary Howell gave us some historical information about what was here that's more specific than people just saying Warren Street was filled with this kind of shop. She really goes into some detail about the industrial past of Hudson. And I hope we can start to put together some of these themes that people are describing as housing related, including jobs, youth programs, and education. So this is Mary, and she was interviewed in 2015.
Hudson was very different then. Of course, you came to Hudson to do your shopping. But when I was in high school, of course, we had out on Route 66. There were factories out there. There were a lot of work here then for people. Canada Dry was out there. The Match Factory, V&O Press. I think there was another one. And then the cement plants. There was one, the Atlas down south of Hudson, and the other one, Lone Star, I think it was called, on the other side of Hudson. Northeast, I think it was. But anyway, when I was real little, it seemed like everybody got paid on Friday. Once a week, they'd get paid. And I used to love to come to Hudson on Friday night. Man, I could just sit in that car and look at all the people, and the sidewalks were packed with people. You don't see that today. And there was just about any kind of store you wanted on Warren Street. It was a wonderful store, Kreitzman Maskin, for men's clothes, as nice things as you get in any place today. And then, of course, it was Marsh and Backman's, which was like a department store. That was three stories. And now Mr. Richmond had a dress shop. There were a lot of dress shops. Lord, there even was a girdle shop. And there were grocery stores on Warren Street. Grocery stores, the Sunkist Market. And Singer Sewing, that was there. Just, there was so much there. And I know Warren Street is busy now, but not much that the local people can get, you know? And then what really killed it is when they put the shopping centers up out on Fairview. Then the factories closed. People moved away.
What time was that, Mary?
let's see, I got out of high school in 53. And they were still going then, I'm sure. So it was sometime after 1953. Yeah. And I know the cement plant, a lot of people had hopes that that would start up again when St. Lawrence bought the Atlas plant south of Hudson. It would be nice to have some kind of factory, something. And at one time, my gosh, they had factories. There was a pocketbook factory. A lot of women. Those factories gave jobs for women. They were good for the women. And there was another one that made mattresses, waterbeds. Waterbeds they made. But that's changed. They do make things of wood now out there. That's out off of Fairview. And for a while there was one that made novelties like Christmas things. I know I have a picture of that. And a lot of them burned down and they just never built them. And some of those, I think it might have been the pocketbook factory, was up on 6th Street. And many years ago, before my time, let's see, because Frank, when he was in the orphanage, one of those factories canned mushrooms. Down where I live, in fact, part of my land is what used to be the Burden Iron Mines down in Livingston. And when the mines closed and they pulled out, two brothers by the name of Knaus bought, and they raised mushrooms down inside the caves. And then they had a big factory. They had other factories too, but a big one in Hudson where they canned them. And my brother was telling me, the one that came from the orphanage, the older kids worked down in those factories. He can remember canning beets down there. That I didn't know till he told me. And that where Knaus grew the mushrooms, that now is one of the largest storage places in the world for not just government documents, but Lord, anybody, if you want to pay the rent, it's all these little like big closets down underground. I know Yoko Ono rented one time for her furs and artwork and things like that.
Okay, so that was an excerpt that was very descriptive in terms of consolidating a list that we've been pulling together from many interviews for years. But Mary gave us a whole string of factories, and we are supposed to interview someone about the mushroom factory. Any response to jobs, factories, what you're hearing? Anyone want to make connections or tell us how you feel?
In the other city where I have a lot of experience, in Athens, Georgia, there's a lot of similar displacement and gentrification problems. And there was a Black-led economic justice coalition that emerged, that one of the things that they fostered was worker-owned cooperatives for different kinds of, for like the kind of the new economy of Athens, which was a college town. But I always think about some of this, I'm not sure how much this is just daydreaming but I think about levers that the community has in terms of, I don't know, developments that are coming in, or hotels, our ability to create, workers' unions and to advocate for higher wages for people who work in service, and to not promise city resources to businesses unless they're willing to work with particular groups of people, or to hire locally, or things like that. I know that there's people who are working on things like that, and it's not my expertise, but not to mention all the cannabis money that's about to start moving around the county. I just like to think that there's a way to create the kinds of jobs that could support families the way that they used to around here. That's not just the jobs that Haley was describing for sort of like artsy types. And yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else want to enter in on this around jobs or what you heard? Okay. I think what I want to do is play something. This is Courtney interviewing Calvin, both Hudson residents. And you're going to hear, again, some resonance with the discussion of youth and what is available for youth in Hudson. I want to just describe some of the thinking of what we did tonight as in keeping with an oral history tradition of giving the research back to the people it came from. And the City of Hudson residents are the narrators in this archive. And I want to, before I play this, just make sure you know that this is now social research that is available for you. And there are 500 and growing narrators to listen to. And you can look them up by name. If you are looking to hear someone's lived experience in our area, or you can scroll through and browse and find someone whose name you don't know. And we also have songs and ambient sound in here. And the archive is now, it's 4 different languages are represented. So if you want to listen in Bengali, Mandarin, or Spanish, there are narrators who are narrating in those languages as well. And I've asked Tracy to put in the chat a link to how you can be a narrator. If you click on this post-it note here, be a narrator, suggest a narrator. But the reason I'm mentioning this, it's not just to toot the horn of the archive, it's really that this tradition of reciprocal ethnography and collaborative analysis is to give this research back. And I want to tell you that there is a theme that just says housing and gentrification. And if you click on that, all the interviews in the archive that deal with housing and gentrification are identified as a playlist. And we've made a short playlist for you tonight to take home. And Tracy's going to put that SoundCloud list in the chat as well. And those are about, I think, 8 or 9 interviews that you might be interested in listening to. I'm going to play this last excerpt, and then I'd love to use our final minutes together to ask our community guides if they want to close out in any way, and to ask all of you to put something in the chat about a question you're left with or a solution you'd like to see if you have an answer and want to find other people who want to join you. This is Calvin.
You know, I guess it boils down to like the haves versus the have-nots, and it's continuing on for generations. But what I would like to see is just more financial aid, whether it's, you know, upscaling the youth center that we're currently in, or fixing like the sidewalks on the streets so people can actually go outside and walk and just like enjoy the summer. A lot of the sidewalks are just crappy, unless you're on Warren Street, which like, you know, it seems like all the money is just like, is just streamlined through Warren Street, whether it's for, you know, antiques and little boutiques and all the sorts, which I feel like it doesn't really go back to the community. It just supports that one establishment or that one business instead of, you know, spreading the resources to the youth where it's needed. Yeah, and just more recreational opportunities, whether it's, you know, sports leagues or, again, like arts and crafts or traveling opportunities.
How do you feel about the gentrification going on in Hudson?
Oh man, gentrification. You know, it's here. It's evident. It's had a major effect on the outlook of Hudson and what Hudson currently looks like. You know, it's kind of forced those who've lived here for years to move elsewhere or to consolidate their already small homes. I myself have kind of become a victim of gentrification. I used to live on 2nd Street, and I currently live on 5th Street. And just that move alone kind of gave me a perspective on the gentrification in Hudson. It's kind of, yeah, it's kind of broadened the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and created a lot of frustration and, you know, angst within the local community. And in return, I feel like you know, the tourists or the visitors, they kind of, you know, they're not naive, but I feel like they see it as well. You know, it's kind of torn the community apart. Because, you know, the people who lived here for so long and tried to, you know, gain a better sense of life aren't able to do so because now homes are outrageously priced, or, you know, places that we once vacant aren't available anymore, or places that we once you know, attended aren't readily available anymore due to gentrification. It just seems as if the you know, the almighty dollar has taken over, and if you don't have the money, you can't live the life that you want to live, and you're forced to kind of pick up the scraps and do with them as you may, if that makes any sense. But yeah.
It does make sense. Do you feel like how should I put this? Do you feel like what community do you see that this has the most effect upon?
Gentrification.
Yeah.
What community has it affected the most?
Yeah, what communities?
I would say that the I don't know what word to use, but the urban community or the young community, the poor community, the black community, the brown community. You know, it's affected those who have lived here and struggled. So yeah, I would say it's definitely the black community.
So how do you feel like the youth have been affected?
I feel like the youth have they've received the grunt of all of the, you know, the political and financial outrage. Like, you know, the kids received the grunt of it, whether it's, you know, because they have a single parent home, or, you know, someone's incarcerated, or they just they may not have enough food in the house, or whatever the case is. I feel like the kids ultimately receive the backlash of it all, and yet they're the future, and we invest so much in them, but we don't necessarily provide them with the tools and resources to overcome, you know, the challenges that the challenges that they do face each day. So ultimately, I think we're failing them because we know what the problems are. We know that we know that what the problems are, but we don't necessarily address the issues as we should to help the younger kids.
You know,
Okay. So that was Calvin. I really love that interview, partly because it's two Hudson residents and there's an intimacy there. And I know we don't have the same intimacy and privacy in this room, but I really wanted to know, fresh off of listening, if we could take a minute to put in the chat something you heard tonight. And also maybe something you didn't hear that you want to hear, a conversation you want to have. And it can be very specific. Like I want a training on, I want to learn more about land trusts. It can be very practical. It can be a resource you need. Or it could be a philosophical conversation you want to have. But I'd love in the chat if you could take a minute and reflect on something you heard tonight and something you want to hear and didn't hear. So as people are using that chat space, a couple people have already put forth reflections, which we really appreciate. And I wanted to ask our guides tonight, Des and Sarah, and I think Claire had to leave. I don't know if Claire made it back. But I wanted to ask Des and Sarah if you have either a question that you're asking yourself, the communities, or everyone in this room. Do you have a question or anything that you want to leave us with?
I guess I can go first.
Okay.
Don't really know if I have a specific question in mind. Just what like Sarah said about community land trust. I've been like researching those, and I researched a bunch of information for this meeting. Just in case I have to speak about it or something. And I just think about that as like a solution that I feel like people that should be more in the forefront of like the community's mind. I think it's like a kind of like a wonderful like option. And so, I'm just all about just like learning, like trying to find out different ways to do it because the ways we've been doing it hasn't been working, obviously. And, the roots in community land trust goes back to just like, poor Black people, and just like newly like freed slaves and just having to sort of like get together and form cooperatives to protect each other and support each other and stabilize each other's lives. And that is, what we should be about. And in a way, I feel like what we are about, if I'm talking about like minorities, then I feel that it is within us, given our history to be community oriented, that is in our, blood in some way. And so we all, might have this like need and we all in some ways have this little respect for each other. It is sort of just these bureaucratic circumstances that block us from one another. And I think that we have to work around that. We have to work around these like Western, like colonial models of like living. We just have to I don't know. I can't think of the word. I don't know. I just really feel that there's just so many ways to help, and there's just so many models to use. There's so many people who can support us, who we can support, and it is just about us realizing, our own inner strength in all of this. There's never been a time, throughout history where like the people did not have like sort of a passion, a desire, and that desire formed something amazing that changed the way everything had been done before. So I think that's just something to recognize, that when you decide to fight for someone's rights, you put yourself in a culture, a big, long, endless culture of fighters, and of you place yourself in a spirit of power, and you have solidarity, and you are like not alone in any of the actions that you take, because it all accumulates. It's all built off of something someone has done before you. And so that's, again, that is community, and that is our biggest thing. And as people, our communities and how we relate to one another is and will always be our biggest thing. And so we should always, I feel like, focus on that, focus on each other, love each other. The word fix, I feel like, is never right. We have to heal, we have to like soothe, our traumas. And so that will always be my biggest thing. And I hope that, there's others who feel the same. And I hope we can get together and just plan something new, no matter how radical, no matter how like out of the box. There's clearly a need, and we must address it, because that is our obligation as human beings who have empathy, for each other. And I'm gonna let like Sara speak. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was incredible, Dezjuan. I think you're talking about healing. I think a lot of times people who maybe grow up like I did, completely benefiting from structures of racial capitalism, have a hard time imagining an alternative. But when you don't benefit from it, it's usually pretty easy to imagine that there can be and should be an alternative. And most communities that are impacted are often the ones who are building those alternatives. And I want to uplift like a few things that are in the chat that Kaya talked about, wanting to prevent the co-optation of the like cultural and creative communities, and not just thinking about artists, but I'm sure like organizers and all the work that community members put into making Hudson a special place to live, from how to prevent that from being co-opted by real estate speculation. I think that's also related to what Michelle commented earlier on about people are moving here. People will always migrate. And what can we do? What are the ways that people who migrate with a lot of privilege to understand that not just the impacts, but to find real tangible, there's got to be like a story that we can tell about our communities and our roles in them, that we don't just keep rehearsing and recapitulating toward these processes of displacement that have really vast violent consequences. Like gentrification is absolutely related in really technical and tangible ways to crises like public health and nutrition and the slow violence of food apartheid, and then also like policing and youth in conflict with the law having their lives ended by the police and people in prison all around the Hudson Valley. I mean, the patterns that we're talking about are at once like dizzyingly too big, but there are ways to like grab on and hold on to each other and work together. And yeah, I feel like I should have just let Dezjuan finish out, but I think what you're talking about with the healing is I want to ask people like me to be really unapologetic in abandoning our sense of entitlement to profit from the ownership of land, and not necessarily to enter radical financial instability, but that there's got to be ways that we can come together where we can talk about providing for people's basic needs that isn't just about fitting it into the logic of capitalism. Now we'll have to play that game a little bit because we need to build houses tomorrow. But yeah, those are the things that I think about.
Thank you so much to Des and to Sara and to Claire. Thank you to everyone who participated, however you participated. I'm not going to close out abruptly because there are amazing things happening in the chat. And I see how much this is a thoughtful group and a quiet group, but actively engaged with this conversation. And I hope that this will be really this initiative, the community listening events are supposed to use the archive for ongoing conversation. And housing was an obvious important focus point. I would like to come together again and continue listening and talking, but I really encourage you also to spend time in the archive yourself. And maybe Tracy, you can post that one more time. If you listen to any of the interviews that you heard tonight, you'll see a keyword hyperlinked like housing or gentrification. And if you click on housing, all of the interviews related to housing will be foregrounded. I want to thank our narrators who allowed us to play their narratives tonight. They gave permission for that. I want to thank the library for hosting this event. And does anyone else want to say anything before we say goodnight? Okay, can we give some thanks to Des, Sara, and Claire, please?
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you for the program.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
To be
I hope we can
continued.
talk again sometime, everyone.
Me too. Okay, well, if you registered, we have your email and we will follow up with these links as well. And please be in touch. I dropped my contact info at oralhistorysummerschool.com. And I appreciate you all for being here. Thank you.